I never imagined I would be the one telling this story. I never imagined my husband would fall for someone we trusted with our child. But betrayal doesn't ask for permission. It just arrives, destroying everything in its path. People like to believe they would see it coming. They say things like, "I would know if my partner was cheating," or "I could never be that blind." They talk about red flags and gut feelings as if life always plays fair, as if reality always gives you a clear warning before it hits you in the face. The truth is quieter than that. For me, it did not start with some dramatic discovery. No lipstick on a collar, no stray earring under our bed. It started with a feeling, a tightness in my chest that I could not explain, a silence between us that felt heavier than usual, a look in his eyes that lingered a second too long on something I could not see. I remember the last morning I thought we were normal. The alarm went off at 7. Our son Noah was already awake, humming some song from a cartoon in his room. The sunlight slid through the curtains in our bedroom, creating a soft glow that made everything look gentler than it really was. My husband, Daniel, rolled over, kissed my shoulder, and mumbled something about needing 5 more minutes. It all felt ordinary. It felt like any other day in a life I thought was stable. I got up, made coffee, packed Noah's lunch, peanut butter and jelly, grape juice, a little note I always folded and tucked inside that said something like, "Proud of you," or "You're my favorite person." Those tiny, ridiculous gestures you make because you want your child to feel loved even when you are not standing right in front of them. Daniel came into the kitchen in his usual rush, shirt half-buttoned, tie hanging loose around his neck. He kissed my cheek quickly, thanked me for the coffee, and asked where his blue folder was. I told him it was on the dining table, next to the stack of bills I still needed to pretend did not exist. We moved around each other like a practiced dance, familiar, automatic, comfortable. If you had asked me in that moment how my marriage was, I would have said good. Not perfect, not some fairy tale, but good, solid. I would have pointed to our son, to our home, to the way Daniel still reached for my hand sometimes when we crossed the street together. I would not have told you that there was a small, growing part of me that felt like I was on the edge of something I could not name. We walked Noah to the car together that morning. He skipped between us, holding our hands, swinging his arms like a little human pendulum. He talked about school, about how they were learning to read longer sentences, about how his teacher said he was getting better every week. Her name was Miss Carter. I remember the first time I heard that name, it meant nothing. Just another adult in our child's orbit, another person on the long list of people you are supposed to trust because they work with children and wear a polite smile. By the time I am telling you this, her name feels like a bruise. A place I do not want anyone to touch. We dropped Noah off at school. The parking lot was filled with parents doing the same tired routine. Rushing, checking their phones, kissing foreheads, shouting last-minute reminders. Do your homework. Listen to your teacher. Be kind. I watched Noah run toward the entrance, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, his little legs moving with more determination than coordination. He turned around once, waved at us with that wide, careless smile that only kids have, and then disappeared through the doors. If you freeze that moment, if you turn it into a photograph, you would never guess what was already in motion. You would see a family, a mother, a father, a child, a normal life. You would not see the future version of me, sitting in a quiet room, trying to piece together the exact second everything started to crack. On the drive back, Daniel talked about work, deadlines, office politics. A new client, he said, was driving him crazy. I nodded in all the right places. I asked questions a good wife is supposed to ask. I told him he was overworking himself, that he needed to take a break. He laughed and said we would go somewhere soon, just the two of us, when things slowed down. Things never slowed down. They just shifted. What I remember most about those early days, before suspicion became my shadow, is the way the air in the house started to feel different. Like walking into a room where someone had been arguing, but the argument ended just before you opened the door. The energy still there, heavy and unfinished. He checked his phone more often. He smiled at messages he did not show me. He spent longer in the bathroom, locked behind the thin door that suddenly felt like a wall between us. Little things, the kind of things you could excuse, if you wanted to. And I did. At first, I wanted to. We had been through rough patches before. Money problems, job stress, sleepless nights when Noah was younger. None of that ever made me question his loyalty. I never wondered, back then, if there was someone else. It was not part of our story. Or at least, I thought it wasn't. I used to believe infidelity belonged to other people's lives, to dramatic movies, gossip between coworkers, distant relatives you heard about but never really knew. I did not think it would creep into my house quietly, like a stray animal that found a way through a crack in the foundation. But that is exactly how it happens. It does not knock. It does not introduce itself. It just slips in, settles down, and waits for you to notice. The strange thing is, before I suspected anything, I actually liked Miss Carter. She seemed kind, patient. She called us after the first week of school just to tell us Noah was adjusting well, that he was bright and empathetic, that he comforted another child who cried during class. Her voice on the phone sounded warm, professional, soft in a way that felt reassuring. "Thank you for raising such a wonderful boy," she said. I remember smiling after that call, feeling a small burst of pride, feeling grateful that someone like her was in our son's life. I replay that memory now with a bitter taste in my mouth. I think about how easily we let people in, how quickly we label someone safe based on a few gentle words and a polite tone. If someone had told me then, in that moment, that this woman would become the center of the worst pain I had ever felt, I would have laughed. I would have called it ridiculous, paranoid, cruel. But life does not care if you think something is ridiculous. It does not need your permission to rearrange itself into a shape you don't recognize. Looking back, I think the first real sign was not something I saw, but something I felt. We were sitting at the dinner table one evening, the three of us. Pasta, garlic bread, a salad none of us really wanted to eat. Noah talked about school like he always did, rambling in that breathless way kids have when they are excited and do not yet know how to trim their thoughts. He said something about Miss Carter laughing at one of Daddy's jokes. It should have been nothing. Teachers laugh, parents make jokes. It is normal, ordinary. But the way he said it made something inside me freeze. "Daddy made Miss Carter laugh so hard she covered her face," he said, giggling as he tried to imitate her. Daniel smiled, a little too quickly, too tightly. I watched him as Noah kept talking. I watched the way he shifted in his chair, the way his eyes did not quite meet mine. A small, fleeting stiffness in his body, like someone hearing a sound they hope no one else noticed. It lasted a second, maybe less. If I had not been looking directly at him, I might have missed it completely. That is how betrayal starts. Not with proof, not with certainty, with a flicker. A tiny, almost invisible crack you can feel under your fingertips when you run your hand along the surface of your life. I did not say anything that night. I laughed along with Noah. I asked him what the joke was. I watched Daniel relax when our son could not remember it. I pretended not to notice the way he exhaled in relief. Later, when I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling while Daniel scrolled through his phone beside me, the scene replayed in my mind in painful detail. The story about the joke, the way Noah imitated her, the way Daniel reacted. I turned my head and looked at him, his face lit by the glow of the screen. For a brief second, I wondered who he was talking to, what he was reading, whether he was really just checking emails like he said he always was. He felt me watching him and turned the phone face down on his chest, as if that was more comfortable. "Do you ever just feel like something is wrong, even when you cannot explain why?" I asked. He glanced at me. "Why? What's wrong?" I almost said it. I almost told him that there was a shadow in our house, that something was standing just outside the edge of my understanding. Instead, I swallowed the words. I shook my head. Nothing, just tired. He kissed my forehead and told me to sleep. If I had spoken then, maybe things would have played out differently. Maybe he would have lied sooner. Maybe he would have confessed. Maybe nothing would have changed at all, except the timing of the moment my world collapsed. This is the part of the story where I was still trying to believe in the version of my life I had built in my head, the version where my husband was faithful, where my son was safe, where the people we trusted stayed in the roles we gave them: wife, husband, teacher, family. I did not know yet that those roles were already breaking apart. I did not know that the woman I believed was helping my child grow was slowly, quietly tearing my family apart from the inside. All I knew was that something felt wrong, and that feeling was not going to go away. 3 days after that dinner, the feeling in my chest had grown heavier, like a stone pressed just beneath my ribs. It wasn't panic, and it wasn't fear. It was something quieter, something that whispered instead of screamed, a warning I couldn't translate yet. I tried to tell myself it was stress, exhaustion, the ordinary weight of being a parent. But ordinary weight doesn't follow you from room to room. Ordinary weight doesn't wake you in the middle of the night with your heart already beating too fast. Nothing dramatic happened that week, at least not on the surface. Daniel went to work. I did too. We both picked up Noah on alternate days, and every night we ate together as if our lives were exactly the same as they had always been. But I started to pay attention. Not in an obsessive way, not yet. More like someone testing the temperature of the air, wondering why it suddenly felt colder in a house that should have been warm. The next meaningful moment came on a Wednesday afternoon. I received an email from the school. Nothing strange at first, just a reminder about an upcoming parent meeting and a note praising Noah for helping another student with reading. Attached at the bottom was a short message from Miss Carter herself. She thanked us again for being supportive parents, and she mentioned how much she enjoyed working with Noah. It was innocent, polite, professional. But then I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Her email signature included her school photo, and she looked different than I expected. Younger, softer, with a brightness in her eyes and a calm, confident smile that made her look like someone who knew exactly how to talk to people, exactly how to make them feel seen. Not beautiful in the traditional sense, not glamorous or dramatic, but approachable, warm. The kind of warmth that makes people open up without realizing they're doing it. I stared at that photo longer than I meant to. Not because I felt threatened, because something inside me whispered, so this is who she is. This is the woman who spends more waking hours with my child than I do. This is the person who speaks to my husband more often than I realized. I closed the email, but her face stayed with me. That same day, when I picked Noah up from school, she was standing at the classroom door talking to a group of parents. She smiled as she spoke, listening intently, nodding, touching her hand to her chest when she laughed. She had this habit of tilting her head slightly when someone said something meaningful, as if she wanted them to know she was truly hearing them. I watched her for a moment from a distance. Not suspicious, not jealous, curious maybe, trying to match the woman in the photo to the woman in front of me. Then I noticed something else. Daniel was there too. He never picked up Noah on Wednesdays. It was always my day. But there he was, standing a few feet away from her, leaning against the hallway wall with his arms crossed. Not in a confrontational way, in a comfortable way, like he'd been standing there for a while, like it wasn't strange to him. My stomach tightened. He hadn't mentioned he would be here, hadn't texted, hadn't said he got off work early. And the moment I saw him looking at her, really looking at her, something inside me shifted. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't touching her, he wasn't doing anything inappropriate. But his body language, it had an ease to it that felt out of place, familiarity where there shouldn't have been any. I approached them slowly, watching before I interrupted anything. When she saw me, she greeted me warmly, as if we were old friends, not two women with no real reason to know each other beyond a child in a classroom. "Hi," she said, placing a hand lightly against her collarbone. "Noah did great today. He read an entire page on his own." I thanked her and smiled, but my eyes moved to Daniel. He looked surprised to see me. Too surprised. I didn't know you'd be here, I said softly. He scratched the back of his neck, glancing at her before looking at me again. Yeah, he said. I had a meeting canceled. Thought I'd swing by. Wanted to talk to Miss Carter about that behavior chart thing. There was no behavior chart thing, but I didn't say that. I just nodded. The conversation ended quickly after that. She excused herself to go help another student. Parents drifted away. The hallway thinned out until it was just the three of us standing near the door. Noah tugged at Daniel's sleeve and asked if we could stop for ice cream on the way home. Sure, buddy, Daniel said with a smile. Let's get out of here. But as we walked to the car, I glanced back. Miss Carter was watching us leave. Not with guilt, not with longing, with a strange softness, almost like she was observing something she had no right to be part of. And Daniel? He didn't look back at her, but the tension in his shoulders told me everything I needed to know. Something was shifting between them. The next day, Daniel left early for work, earlier than usual. His alarm went off before 6, and he practically jumped out of bed. He moved quickly around the room, gathering his things, clearing his throat, as if trying to warm up his voice before speaking. Big day today, he said casually, that new client. I watched him tie his shoes with more urgency than necessary. Do you have to meet them in person? I asked. He nodded. Yeah, should be done by lunch though. He kissed my forehead and left. But at 9:45 that morning, while I was making copies at work, my phone buzzed with a school update, a notification that Noah's class was having a reading circle that day. Photos were attached. And in the second picture, clear as day, Daniel was sitting on a tiny chair next to Miss Carter, reading a book with 3 kids gathered at their feet. He wasn't at a client meeting. He was at school. And not only at school, sitting beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. She was mid-laugh, caught in the middle of some joke he must have made. His head was turned toward her, and though the photo was blurry, I could see the softness in his expression. The softness he used to have with me. I stared at that picture until my vision blurred. When I got home that evening, I didn't say anything. I wasn't ready, I wasn't calm. And something in me knew that if I confronted him too early, if I approached the truth without preparation, he would bury it under charm and half explanations and make me feel foolish for even asking. So I waited. Dinner was quiet. Noah talked, but Daniel and I barely said a word. I watched him closely. The way he kept checking his phone, the way he smiled slightly every time the screen lit up. Who are you talking to? I asked once, keeping my voice gentle. Just work stuff, he said, without looking up. Of course, always work stuff. Later that night, I stood in the dark hallway outside the bathroom door, listening to the faint hum of his voice. He was whispering, speaking softly, soft in a way he never used with me anymore. And I heard something that froze me. He laughed, not just any laugh, the kind he used with her in that photo. Light, open, free. Whoever he was talking to on the other side of that door, it wasn't work. I didn't breathe, didn't move. I just waited. When he finally came out, he didn't see me at first. He flinched when he did, clutching his phone a little too tightly, his face tightening before he forced it into a smile. Did you need something? He asked. Yes, I needed the truth. But instead, I said, no, just heading to bed. Later, lying awake again beside him, I knew it with certainty. This wasn't in my head. This wasn't a feeling. Something was happening between my husband and my son's teacher. Something real, something alive, something growing in the shadows of my home. And the worst part was knowing that the story had only just begun. By the time the next week arrived, the uneasiness inside me had grown into something sharper. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It had weight, shape, edges. It sat behind my ribs like a blade that moved every time I took a breath. I kept telling myself to stay calm, to avoid jumping to conclusions, to wait for something more concrete than half-glimpsed moments and strange energy in the room. But waiting felt like standing on thin ice, hearing cracks form under my feet with no idea where the next one would appear. On Monday morning, I dressed for work as usual. I tried to force myself into the rhythm of normal life, hoping routine might quiet the noise inside me. I braided my hair the way Daniel said he always liked. I made Noah's lunch. I poured coffee into a travel mug that suddenly felt too heavy in my hand. But as I stood in the kitchen watching the steam curl upward, I felt like a stranger inside my own morning. Daniel came downstairs a few minutes later. He looked tired, but not in the way someone looks after a poor night's sleep. He looked drained, like someone carrying a secret too heavy to hold comfortably. His voice when he greeted me was softer than usual, forced into brightness at the edges, like he was trying to hide the darkness underneath. "Morning," he said. "Morning." I waited for him to kiss me, but he didn't. He just walked to the counter, grabbed his phone, and scrolled through something with a small smile tugging at his lips. A smile that wasn't for me. That was the moment I realized something important, something painful in its clarity. I wasn't competing with another woman. I was competing with the version of himself he allowed to exist when he was around her. A version that seemed lighter, happier, more alive. And I hated that he had stopped being that version with me. Later that afternoon, I picked Noah up from school again. Parents were scattered along the hallway, some standing in small groups, others crouched beside their kids, tying shoelaces or adjusting jackets. Miss Carter stood outside her classroom door, talking to a mother whose daughter clung to her leg. Her tone was warm, reassuring, patient. A part of me hated her for it. When she saw me approaching, she smiled in that calm, glowing way of hers. She rested a hand gently on Noah's shoulder as he came out carrying his drawings. "He did really well today," she said. "He's improving faster than expected." "Thank you," I replied, my voice steadier than my body felt. There was a brief pause, a pause long enough to make the air tighten. "Is everything all right?" she asked. A simple question, a polite one, but something in her expression made me freeze. It wasn't concern. It was something softer, something almost intimate, like she knew something about my life that she shouldn't know, like she recognized the sadness I had been trying to keep hidden. I wanted to ask her if she had spoken to Daniel today. I wanted to ask her if the two of them shared a laugh in class again, if she looked at him with the same softness she looked at me with now, if she knew the exact sound of his voice when he tried to hide guilt. But I said nothing. "Just tired," I answered. She nodded, still watching me too closely. Then she turned to Noah and said goodbye with that warm, gentle smile that now felt like a warning. When we got home, I checked Daniel's location on the family tracking app we had installed years earlier. It wasn't something I used regularly. I never needed to. We trusted each other, or at least I trusted him. The dot on the screen showed him at an office building across town. Relief washed over me for a moment. Maybe I was imagining everything. Maybe he really was working late after all. But then I noticed the time, nearly 6 p.m. He never stayed that late on Mondays, and something about the angle of the location didn't sit right. It wasn't his company building. It was near the school, not on the same street, but close enough to make my pulse quicken. I watched the dot on the screen move, stop, move again. Then it glitched sometimes. It wasn't perfect. But that night, every small inconsistency felt like a clue pointing towards something I didn't want to face. He came home later than usual. Noah was already asleep. I sat on the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone, pretending I hadn't been waiting, pretending I hadn't been tracking his movements like someone already halfway into heartbreak. "Sorry I'm late," he said, dropping his keys onto the table. The sound echoed across the room. "Busy day." He walked toward me, leaned down, and kissed the top of my head. It was the kind of kiss someone gives out of routine, not affection. "How was your day?" I asked quietly. "Long," he said, "draining." He slumped onto the couch beside me. His eyes were tired again, his shoulders heavy. And yet, when his phone vibrated in his pocket, he straightened instantly, pulling it out with a quickness he didn't disguise. He glanced at the screen, and the corner of his mouth lifted. Not fully, just a small, involuntary curve. "Who is it?" I asked. He looked at me too quickly, like a kid caught sneaking something before dinner. "Work," he answered. "Just work." He placed the phone face down beside him. Not in his pocket, not in his hand, face down, between us, a barrier. I walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water, but my mind wasn't on the faucet or the cup. It was replaying every moment from the last 2 weeks, lining them up like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to complete. When I came back, Daniel was still on the couch. His phone had buzzed again, and this time he lifted the edge of it slowly, reading something without picking it up. He smiled again, that same soft smile, the one I used to think belonged to me. As I watched him from the doorway, a realization settled over me with the quiet finality of a closing door. He wasn't drifting from me. He was moving toward someone else. A real shift, a real direction, a real connection. And although I didn't have proof yet, I had something nearly as powerful: pattern, behavior, instinct. That night, lying beside him in our dark bedroom, I stared at the ceiling again. But this time, I wasn't confused. I wasn't afraid of being wrong. I was afraid of how right I might be. He turned away from me in his sleep, his back curved toward the edge of the bed, leaving a space between us that felt colder than the night air. I reached out slowly, placing my hand near his back but not touching him. The warmth radiating from him felt distant, foreign, like standing near a fire that didn't belong to you anymore. I pulled my hand away. Something was happening, something I no longer had the privilege of ignoring. In the darkness, I whispered a truth I had been avoiding. "I think you're losing me, Daniel." But he didn't stir. And even if he had heard me, I'm not sure he would have understood just how close I was to the moment everything would come crashing down. Because betrayal doesn't happen in an instant. It builds, it spreads, it waits. And the next crack in my marriage was already waiting for me in a place I hadn't checked yet: his phone. I had never been the kind of person who checked my partner's phone. It wasn't a rule I lived by, just something I never felt the need to do. Trust is supposed to be the invisible promise beneath a marriage. You don't have to say it every day. You just live like it's true. But that night, lying beside Daniel in the darkness, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing, I knew something was different. The silence between us wasn't peaceful anymore. It was full, heavy, crowded with unspoken truths. His phone sat on the nightstand beside him, screen down, as always. That little rectangle had become a stranger in our bed, something he guarded with attention that didn't belong in a marriage. I stared at it for a long time, my heartbeat slow but strong, pulsing behind my ribs like a quiet drum. I wasn't waiting for courage. I wasn't battling guilt. I was waiting for the moment I couldn't lie to myself anymore. It came when his breathing deepened, steady and slow, the unmistakable sound of someone who had fallen into heavy sleep. I slid carefully out from under the blanket, planting my feet on the carpet without letting the bed shift too much. I waited another moment, watching the rise and fall of his chest, making sure he was far away in sleep before I moved. The phone was cold in my hand when I lifted it, a cold that felt intentional, like it knew I had no right to hold it. My thumb hovered over the screen. For a moment, I imagined the lock would be different, a new code, something he had quietly changed when he began drifting from our life into another. But when I pressed my birthday into the keypad, the phone unlocked. And that hurt more than I thought it would, because part of me wished it wouldn't open. Part of me wished he had protected the door to whatever truth lived inside that device. It would have meant he cared enough to hide it, but he hadn't. He had left the code the same, as if he believed I would never look, as if he believed I still trusted him too much to even try. The screen lit up, bright and sharp in the dark room, painting my hands in cold light. I glanced at Daniel again. He didn't move. I went to the messages. At first, everything looked normal. Conversations about work, a few group chats, a message thread with his brother, one with his mother. Nothing suspicious, nothing damning, nothing that justified the ache inside my chest. But then I scrolled further, down toward the bottom, past familiar names, to one I'd never seen before. A number with no contact name, no profile picture, just an unfamiliar string of digits. But the most important part wasn't the number. It was the preview text beneath it. A single sentence that made my blood turn hot and cold all at once. "Thank you for staying late today. It meant more than you know." My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't falter. Something inside me detached, like my heart stepped out of my body and asked me to observe instead of feel. I opened the conversation. The thread wasn't long, 10, maybe 12 messages total. Nothing explicit, nothing sexual, nothing that screamed affair. But sometimes betrayal whispers. Sometimes it hides in tone, not content. Her first message was from 3 days earlier. "I appreciate your help after class. The kids needed the encouragement, and so did I." His reply, "Of course, anytime." Another from her, "You always know the right thing to say. I don't know how you do that." And his response, "I'm glad I can make your day a little easier. A little easier." I read those 4 words again, letting them settle in a place that now felt hollow. Then another message from her, sent earlier that afternoon, before he came home late. "I liked talking with you today. I didn't expect it to feel that natural." Followed by his reply, "It's always natural with you." Natural. With you. I stared at those words until they blurred. I scrolled further up, hoping, desperately, that there would be something that softened it, some indication that I was misinterpreting everything, that he was helping her with a school project, that they were coordinating something for Noah, something innocent. But the messages were not about school. They weren't about Noah. They were about connection. Subtle, growing, careful enough to disguise itself, but not careful enough to hide completely. I closed my eyes. It wasn't physical yet, but emotional betrayal has a heartbeat long before bodies ever touch. I opened my eyes again and scrolled down. The last message in the thread was from her, sent just an hour before he came home. "I hope I didn't cross a line today. I trust you." Maybe too much. I looked at the timestamp, then pictured him standing in the hallway at school earlier that week, the way she watched us walk away. I pictured the softness in her eyes, the quiet intimacy she didn't try to hide. I pictured Daniel coming home late that afternoon, smiling at his phone, lying to me about being with a client. And I knew everything I needed to know. Maybe not the full truth, but enough. Enough to understand the shape of the betrayal forming between them. Enough to recognize the emotional distance that had grown between us wasn't random. It was redirected. It was given to someone else. And the worst part wasn't the messages. It was the realization that he had never texted me like that. Not in years. Maybe not ever. Not with that softness, that openness, that unguarded warmth. He was giving her a version of himself he had taken away from me. I locked the phone and placed it back on the nightstand, exactly where it had been. Then I walked down the hallway to the bathroom, closed the door quietly, and turned on the faucet so he wouldn't hear the sound of me breaking. I didn't cry loudly, just tears that slid down in silence, soaking into my hands as I leaned over the sink, breathing in small, shaky gulps that barely filled my lungs. It wasn't the affair. Not yet. It was the moment before the storm. The moment when you finally see the outline of the truth you tried so hard not to notice. The moment when denial stops working because the evidence is right there, glowing on a screen, inches from your face. After a while, the tears stopped. I wiped my cheeks, took a breath, turned off the faucet. When I returned to the bedroom, Daniel hadn't moved. He looked peaceful, rested, as if his world had not shifted at all. Mine had. I slid back under the covers, staring into the darkness, letting the quiet settle around me like dust. There was no going back now. Something inside me had changed. Not anger, not yet. Something sharper, determination. If there was a line between them, I was going to find it, and when I found it, I was going to confront him with the truth he thought he could hide from me. Because this wasn't just my marriage. This was my family, my child, my home. And I was not going to let it collapse without seeing exactly who pushed it first. The next morning felt different, as if the world had shifted half an inch overnight. I woke before Daniel, lying still beside him, while the early light crept silently across our bedroom wall. He looked peaceful, unaware, his hand curled loosely near the edge of the blanket. It was the face of a man who believed he was safe inside his secrets, safe inside my trust, safe inside a marriage he had already begun stepping out of. I watched him breathe, watched the small rise and fall of his chest, and felt something inside me settle with cold, steady clarity. I wasn't imagining anything. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't paranoid. I was finally seeing the truth. He stirred just a little, turning his head toward me. His eyes fluttered open, soft and unfocused. For a moment, he looked like the man I had once loved without question. Then he blinked, and the distance came back, sliding between us like a shadow. "Morning," he said, his voice warm but rehearsed. "Morning." He leaned forward to kiss my cheek, but the gesture felt misplaced, like a line from an old script he hadn't realized we'd stopped performing. I let him kiss me anyway. I needed to feel the contrast. I needed to feel how foreign it had become. He got out of bed, stretching his arms before heading to the bathroom. I listened to the familiar sounds, the running water, the cabinet opening, the clink of his toothbrush against porcelain. Normal sounds, ordinary, but they no longer belonged to the life I thought I had. He left early again, claiming another meeting. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I let him lie, because now I needed information. Proof he couldn't talk his way around, something undeniable, something that would force him to face what he'd been hiding. After dropping Noah off at school, I went back home and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the messages from the night before now burned into my memory. Every word felt heavier in daylight, like the truth was clearer when there was nothing left to shield it. "I trust you." Maybe too much. It echoed inside my head in her voice, soft, warm, confident. I thought about her hands resting on children's shoulders, her patient smile, her calm voice when she talked to Noah, when she talked to me, when she talked to Daniel. A woman who understood how to make people feel comfortable, understood how to listen, understood how to create connection. And connection, when crossed, becomes danger. But I didn't want to confront him with half-truths, not yet. A message thread could be brushed off, explained away, twisted into something innocent. I knew Daniel well enough to know he would try. No, if I confronted him, I needed the truth all the way to its core. That evening, after Noah fell asleep, I sat beside Daniel on the couch. He had his laptop open, but he wasn't typing. He was staring at the screen with a smile that didn't belong to the empty document he pretended to read. "Are you okay?" I asked. He looked startled, his smile fading. "Yeah, why?" "You've been different lately." He blinked. Confusion, or the performance of confusion, hard to tell anymore. "Different how?" I shook my head. "Never mind. Forget it." He hesitated for a moment, studying my face as if trying to read something written under my skin. Then he shrugged and went back to his screen. That was when I knew he wouldn't confess. Not now. Not without something undeniable. And the only place left to find the truth was the place where secrets hide easiest, the school. The next day, I asked for a half-day at work. My boss didn't question it. I rarely asked for time off, and even if I had, people rarely challenge the face of someone who looks like they haven't slept in days. I arrived at the school around 1 in the afternoon, not the usual pickup time, not during any event, just a quiet, unassuming hour when classrooms hummed softly with focused voices. My heart felt strangely calm as I walked through the hallway. Not racing, not shaking, just steady, determined. I wasn't here to make a scene. I wasn't even here to confront her, not yet. I was here to understand the truth I had been circling for weeks. The door to Noah's classroom was slightly ajar. I peeked inside, expecting to see the children scattered around the room in reading groups. Instead, I saw her, Miss Carter, sitting at her desk with her head resting in her hand, staring down at something on her phone. Her expression wasn't sad, it wasn't happy. It was something else, something mixed, something that looked like a complicated ache. I watched her for a moment from the doorway. Her phone lit up again, her lips pressed together, not in a smile, in a breath she didn't release. I stepped back before she saw me. A classroom aide noticed me and walked over. I forced a polite smile, pretending I was just dropping something off. The aide nodded, unaware of anything beneath the surface. I walked through the hallway again, looking at bulletin boards and student art projects, pretending to be someone wandering without purpose. But then, through the window of one of the side classrooms, I saw something that made my breath stop. Daniel, standing inside a small empty classroom, talking to someone just out of sight. His posture relaxed, his hand rubbing the back of his neck the way he did when he was nervous but trying not to be. He wasn't supposed to be here. He had told me he was working. He always told me he was working. I stepped closer to the window. And then she walked into view, Miss Carter. She stood in front of him, tugging lightly on the sleeve of her cardigan, her expression soft and conflicted. Daniel looked at her with the same softness I had seen in his text messages, the same softness I remembered from our early years, the softness I hadn't seen directed at me in months. They weren't touching, they weren't kissing, but emotional betrayal doesn't need skin to ignite. The air between them was charged in a way that said everything physical was inevitable, not yet realized, but growing, like a spark waiting for oxygen, like two people finding each other at the wrong time, or maybe exactly the moment they had been hoping for. My knees weakened, my throat tightened, a ringing filled my ears, the kind of ringing people describe in movies when they witness something that changes them. I watched as she spoke quietly, watched his face soften in response, watched her step closer by a small, nearly invisible inch. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. Their bodies said everything. Her fingertips brushed his wrist. A small touch, a moment, a boundary breaking. He didn't pull away. I turned before they saw me, gripping the edge of the nearest doorframe to steady myself. My vision blurred, my chest tightened. I forced myself to breathe slowly, evenly, quietly. When I left the school, the sun was too bright, the wind too warm, the world too normal for what had just happened. I sat in my car with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel. My pulse throbbed in my temples. My hands felt cold. My heart felt raw. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It wasn't fear. It wasn't imagination. It was truth, undeniable and unspoken. He had crossed a line. She had crossed a line. And their next step, whatever it would not wait for my permission. By the time I drove home, something inside me had hardened, a quiet strength, a focused resolve. I knew what the next step had to be. No more watching, no more wondering, no more waiting for him to tell me a truth he was never going to offer. It was time. Time to confront the betrayal taking shape in the shadows of my life. Time to drag the truth into the light and force it to face me. Because this wasn't just my heartbreak anymore. This was the moment my entire family's story would shift forever. I didn't sleep the night before I confronted him. I lay awake in the dark, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, to the soft turning of Noah in his bed across the hall, to the quiet, steady breathing of the man beside me who had no idea what was about to happen. Every sound felt louder. Every second stretched out, thin and fragile, like a wire pulled too tight. I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had burned itself out days ago. What was left was clarity, cold, steady, precise. Morning came slowly. The sky outside our window was still gray when Daniel woke up, stretching and yawning as if everything in our life was the same as yesterday. He kissed the corner of my mouth before getting out of bed. I let him. It felt like being touched by a stranger who happened to know my name. We moved through the routine like actors in a play whose ending was already written. Breakfast, coffee, packing Noah's lunch. For a moment, I wondered how many mornings like this he had lived while hiding pieces of himself from me. How many times he had stood in this kitchen with betrayal tucked quietly under his tongue. As he reached for the keys to leave for work, I said his name. Daniel. He paused, half turned toward me with one sleeve still unbuttoned. Yeah? We need to talk. His expression flickered. Just a flicker. Barely there, but I saw it. The tightening around his eyes, the shift in his breathing, the subtle brace of someone waiting to see how much I knew. About what? He asked, keeping his voice steady. I didn't answer. Not yet. I walked to the living room and pointed to the couch. Sit. He hesitated for a moment, then obeyed. His brow furrowed as if confused, as if I were the one behaving strangely. I stayed standing for a moment, letting the silence build between us. That silence had lived with me for weeks. It was time he felt it too. I saw you at the school yesterday, I said finally. Everything in him stilled. Not visibly at first, but I felt it. The air tightened, his hands clasped together on his lap. Okay, he said carefully. And? He wasn't denying it, not yet. He was waiting to see what version of the truth he needed to offer me. I stepped closer. I saw you in the empty classroom, with her. A shadow crossed his face. There it was, the flash of truth he couldn't hide. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Do you want to tell me what that was? He swallowed. His jaw tightened. He tried to speak, stopped, tried again. It wasn't what it looked like. The words were so predictable, so flimsy, they almost made me laugh. Almost. He ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head. I wasn't thinking straight. She was upset. She needed someone to talk to. And you're her emotional support now? I said quietly. He winced. No, it's not like that. Then tell me what it's like. He hesitated. Too long. The silence said everything his mouth refused to form. I felt something inside me shift. Not anger, not sorrow. Something clearer. My voice stayed calm when I spoke again. I saw her touch you, Daniel. His eyes snapped up to mine. What? On your wrist. Gently, intimately. You didn't pull away. He exhaled, long and slow, rubbing his forehead. It wasn't, she didn't mean anything by it. And you? Did you mean anything by it? He didn't answer, so I continued. Because her messages suggest otherwise. His head jerked toward me. You read my phone? For the first time, anger flickered in his voice. Not guilt, anger at being caught. Yes, I said, I did. After weeks of watching you pull away from me, watching you smile at your phone more than you smiled at your family, watching you hide pieces of yourself from me, I read it. He stood quickly, pacing, his hands on his hips. He looked like a man caught between confession and escape. It wasn't an affair, he said. It wasn't physical. Not yet, I agreed. But emotional betrayal is still betrayal. He stopped, stared at me. I heard the words echo in that quiet space between us. Something changed in his posture, a sagging of his shoulders, a shift in his gaze. He knew I was right. He knew there was no lie left strong enough to hold up the crumbling version of the story he wanted me to believe. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, he whispered. It's never intentional at first. His eyes glistened. Whether from guilt or loss, I couldn't tell. He sat back down, burying his face in his hands. I stepped closer but didn't touch him. Tell me when it started. He shook his head. I'm not sure. Then tell me when you realized you felt something for her. His breath caught. A small, broken sound escaped him. And in that moment, I knew his heart had already crossed a line long before his body ever did. It wasn't planned, he said softly. She was going through something. She confided in me. I just connected. It felt good to be needed. The words hit like a final blow, not because they surprised me, but because they confirmed what I already understood. He gave her a part of himself that belonged to us. What about our son? I asked quietly. Our little boy. You chose someone who teaches him, someone who will look him in the eyes every day, knowing what she did to his family. Daniel froze. I watched the realization form slowly across his face, the full scope of the damage he had never considered. He wasn't just betraying me, he was contaminating a place that should have been safe for our child. I can end it, he said quickly. I'll stop all of it. I'll transfer schools. I'll talk to her. No. My voice was steady, certain, final. This isn't yours to fix alone. This isn't something a single conversation erases. This is something you chose, something you nurtured, something you crossed into willingly. He looked at me then, eyes glossy, searching my face for forgiveness. I loved you, he whispered. Loved. Past tense. You don't get to use that word right now, I said. He looked down. What happens now? He asked. I took a breath. It felt like the first full breath I had taken in weeks. Now, I said, we protect our son. We rebuild boundaries. We tell the truth. We face the consequences. And you stay away from her, starting today. He nodded slowly, brokenly. I walked to the window, pulling the curtain back to let in a sliver of daylight. The world outside looked the same as always. Cars passing, birds crossing the sky, neighbors walking dogs. A world that wouldn't pause for my pain. I turned back toward him. This is not the end of my story, I said, but it might be the end of ours. That depends on what you do from this moment forward. He looked devastated. I didn't enjoy seeing it, but I needed it. We stood there, the space between us filled with everything we had lost. And then I spoke the truth that would stay with me long after this moment was over. The hardest part isn't that you loved someone else. The hardest part is realizing you stopped loving me long before I noticed. His face crumpled, but I didn't look away, because some truths deserve the dignity of being seen. I walked past him, toward Noah's room. I needed to hold my child. I needed to remind myself that some love doesn't betray. Some love doesn't wander. Some love stays. Behind me, I heard Daniel whisper my name through a breaking voice, but I didn't turn around. Betrayal doesn't disappear because someone regrets it. It lingers, it teaches, and it leaves you standing in the doorway of a life you no longer recognize, deciding whether to rebuild or walk away from the ruins. I didn't have the answer yet, but for the first time in weeks, the silence inside me finally felt like mine again.